I think so. I have Zelda and the other co-advisor. Which is good, but a few more minutes. What do you say? These are a full class. And two other girls show up and they start talking about Professor I had him last semester. And I just we were in class this semester. Oh, is he black hair? Okay.
All right, so have you all done the reading that I emailed you? All right, good stuff. So first of all, let us try and recall some discussion from last time. Anybody can name an interesting cognitive bias that we discussed on Tuesday? All right, so there you go. That was a good one. Anything else?
Something like Mueller or something?
The Mueller-Liar illusion with the two lines, right? It's not really a cognitive bias, but I'll give you that one. All right. Anything else?
Do we have to know the names?
I mean, you don't have to know the names, but I would hope you remember something from last time.
The one about like favoring the poor and dealing with the taxes.
Yeah, so what was the nature of the bias?
That we tend to go with the lesser people, even if we can't for both.
All right, so the problem with the bias was the inconsistency between the two frames, right? There's nothing wrong with favoring the poor, right? It's just that you change your decision depending on how the description of the reality is framed, right? And the key word is framed. It is called the framing effect. You don't have to know that, but it's a very, it's a very common bias that enters into a lot of things. Just making sure that you guys haven't forgotten everything we talked about. I just wanted to start off with a little review so that it sinks in a little bit. There is a for your general purpose study skills, you should know that the most effective way to really remember something very well is called the spaced repetition system. Namely, you learn something, then you need to review it at some later time, and then you need to review it again at some later time, right? So if you encounter something multiple times, you are much more likely to actually remember it for a long time rather than you just see it once, hey, that's cool, but like, and then a month later you're like, what was that? I don't remember, right? So I try to at least give a little bit of a review, so we start on the way to some good old-fashioned spaced repetition. All right. Okay. So let's talk about a little bit about our readings here. So you read part 1 of The Truth About Money? You started? Raise your hand if you cracked it. The Truth About Money.
Chapter 36.
Yes, it was. And part 1 also, right? It was chapter 36 and part 1. Right? So raise your hand if you cracked open the truth about money. Okay, a few. Okay, thank you. Okay, let me remind you that it's kind of a good idea to actually read stuff that I ask you to read. Okay, so if you did read something in The Truth About Money, you saw some sort of reasons why you need to have financial plans, right? You see something like that? Maybe? Okay. So what are some of the reasons that you need to have financial plans?
In order to be fit for the future financially, you must have a plan to get there.
Yeah. It's a good idea, right? Anything else in particular? Yeah.
In case you lose your job.
All right. Anybody else?
In case of a medical emergency.
Okay. Anything else?
So that you can someday retire.
All right. It's a good goal.
Vacation.
Okay, sure. I mean, in general, you want to. I mean, there are a lot of things that you might want to be able to do in your life, and it helps to have money, which will enable you to do stuff, right? In general, I mean, there is a lot of stuff. You know, some of you might be thinking of like raising children. Eventually, children are very expensive, and they're getting more expensive every year. It's actually kind of funny if you compare the third edition of The Truth About Money with the fourth edition. And he gives estimates of the cost of raising a child up to age 18. You know, they like went up by something like 15% from the 2004 edition to this 2011 edition, right? So stuff's getting more. Some stuff is getting more expensive as we go on. In some ways, a lot of that spending, of course, is discretionary. People like to throw money at their children and hope it works, which is not necessarily, not necessary for. Not all of that spending is necessary for you to succeed in your goal. But in general, there's a lot of expenses. Retirement, you don't want to plow the fields until the day you die, right? You kind of, you want to be productive. You want to work some. Maybe you'll try a few different careers, but eventually you want to kind of hang loose, right? And you cannot really, hang loose if you happen not to have saved any money, right? Because then you'll either have to mooch off your kids if you happen to have raised some kids, right? Or you have to be destitute poor, which kind of sucks, right? There are a lot of things you might want to do. But at the end of the day, right, the point is that we're all kind of looking for happiness, right, in various guises. Different things will make us happy, and there is really nothing wrong. I mean, I can't tell you that this is wrong, it shouldn't make you happy, or that's good and it should make you happy, right? We all have different preferences, and that's the way the world is. But here is where some of those cognitive biases that we talked about rear their ugly heads. You can imagine the ugly head, maybe with horns, right? Like the ugly head of cognitive biases, right? And unsurprisingly, maybe to you by now, is that your personal estimates of what will make you happy are not necessarily correct due to the various cognitive biases. So first of all, let me jump over to the PDF article that I posted for you on Blackboard. Did you guys check that out? Pages 5 through 16, something like that. All right. So so one of the ways to try to ameliorate some of your cognitive biases is to actually look at the data of what is actually going on statistically with the population, right? So what does the data tell us about what kind of things make people happy? It's a good. There's a lot of confusion in the research of happiness, right? That was one of the key points of the article. Before we discuss some general purpose conclusions we can draw, who can tell me what are some of the mechanisms that we use, or not we, but economists and cognitive psychologists use to measure somebody's level of happiness? What kind of surveys?
Questionnaires, asking them, how happy do you think you are on a scale from 1 to 10, and then asking them other questions about how much money they have, and so forth.
All right, so that was the first and the kind of the obvious mechanism that researchers started using to kind of try to find the covariance of happiness. And they just sent out a bunch of surveys to a bunch of people, and they asked them things about their income and their family status and health and etc. Right, all sort of thing. And they also asked them some general question, something of the form like, generally speaking, how happy would you say you are, right? And it was some kind of a scale of like 1 to 10 or 1 to 7 or whatever kind of scale they chose. And then they collected a bunch of data, right? And so now you have some data, you have people ranking how happy they are, and you have people telling you all sorts of stuff about themselves, right? And so doing some fancy data analysis, you could try to figure out how many of you are familiar with the concept of linear regression, right? Okay, so those of you who might have taken statistics who know that, so basically you just run some multivariate linear regression on all of these variables and see if anything is significantly correlated with this measure of general purpose happiness, right? And so that's in that kind of research, people have found that there is some marginal significance for the level of income that you might have, right? And with some more like digging in the data, actually it was found that happiness co-varies with the log of your income. Right? You guys know the shape of the logarithm function, right? It kind of, let me just draw it for you just in case. Right? So if you have a linear function, right, like just a linear function of something, like let's imagine this is, right, this is income, right here on the horizontal axis. Let me just shove this chair out of the way, right? And let's imagine that this is maybe happiness, right? Happy. Right? If it was in some kind of a linear function of income, right, there'll be a line of some kind of a slope, hopefully upward sloping, right? So that would say, hey, the more income you have, the more happy you are. Now, if it is correlated with the logarithm of happiness, like the log of our horizontal measure of the income is going to be concave, right? It's going to look kind of like that, right? That's shape. So basically, it shows us that as our income goes up from the dismal levels of no money up to some reasonably moderate amounts of income, it really is highly correlated with the general level of happiness. But as we get further and further up in the income, the effect starts flattening out. Right? And by further digging into the data, it generally has been found that once you get above like $75,000 per year in annual income, it kind of really is pretty much flat, right? It still goes up a bit, but the research says, once you have, it's really bad to have no money, right? Because once you're here, so you're really unhappy, right? It's good to have money, but once you have a certain amount of money, let's say like you're here, right? You're not going to make yourself a whole lot more happy by having a lot more money, right? You make yourself a little bit more happy. Again, this is on kind of on average, right? And so this is kind of the result of this general, general questionnaire type of thing, right? And kind of focusing here on the level of income because it's a personal finance and we're talking about money. And there are a lot of other covariates of happiness as well. So what are the problems with this type of survey research? Yeah.
There's no defined upper level of happiness, and people have different happiness rates.
All right. So one problem is indeed that there is really no upper bound on happiness, just like there is no upper bound on income. But when we ask a survey question about happiness, we say on a scale of 1 to 7, how happy are you, right? Or 1 to 5, which is like very unhappy, unhappy, kind of okay, happy, and very happy, right? So it's like 5 levels or whatever. It's a very coarse scale, and it definitely has an upper bound, which is very happy, right? So you might imagine that once, if you're trying to correlate a bounded variable with an unbounded variable, there is no choice but that you will find that once you get above a certain level, there is no more effect, because you just hit the bound on the bounded variable, right? So, I mean, that's kind of very bad statistical procedure to have, yeah?
Oh, no, I was going to say another reason.
Oh, okay, save that for the next 30 seconds, okay? All right, so it's very bad statistics to have your response variable be some kind of a bounded variable, and you have to have your regressor variable be unbounded, right? Because necessarily you're going to be, running, hitting that wall. That's not, not necessarily. Sometimes you don't hit the wall, right? But it's kind of like signal clipping in audio, right? If it's loud enough, you're going to get clipping. If it's quiet enough, it's fine, right? But you want to make sure that you're not clipping. Here, you're probably hitting the upper bound because there are some people who are very happy. And next time they get more money and we ask them, they're still going to be very happy, right? They cannot become more than very happy by whatever scale we measure, right? Do you have another reason?
Yeah, like at the time that someone takes the survey, they might be feeling a certain way because of like outside factors than how they normally feel. Like before they took the survey, maybe like they just got hired at a new position.
Or they just lost their job, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. Like the response to how happy are you, generally speaking, is subject to a lot of evaluative cognitive biases. In particular, there is this thing called the recency effect. Stuff that happens recently feels like it is very important, right? And so if something happened recently to you, like maybe like you just got engaged and you're saying, hey, I'm pretty happy, right? Because generally in this country, people don't get engaged unless they want to, right? Maybe in some other countries, there are like arranged marriages and they can make people unhappy. Like here, generally it's a happy occasion. Right? Or you just got a new job, or you just had a wonderfully tasty meal, right? Or you just found a quarter on the sidewalk, right? And that'll really disproportionately affect your judgment of how happy you are in general. There was actually a study done on the quality of this metric. So they invited participants to take a survey on how happy they are generally, right? And what they did with some of the participants is that they staged a situation where the experimenter asked the person to go make a copy of some piece of paper at the copier down the hall, right? So some of the participants were asked to do that, and the experimenters planted a dime on the side of the copy machine so that the participant would find it, right? And what they found is that the participants who found the dime rated their general level of happiness significantly higher than the participants who didn't. All right? And so you can see, like, you found a dime in the copy machine, and all of a sudden you're saying, how happy are you generally speaking? Well, I'm pretty damn happy. I just found a dime, right? Right? So, I mean, yeah, I hope you can see the ridiculousness of this measure, right? That it's affected by completely minor, unimportant events that happened recently, and they just float to the top of your mind when you think about it, right? Because to answer the question, really, like how happy you are, it takes a lot of introspection. You have to think, well, where was I 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Am I better off now? What kind of things today make me happy? What kind of annoyances have I managed to eliminate? Right? So it's a difficult question, right? And yet, when somebody is asked, how happy are you generally speaking, the answer pops out just like that. Because they just say, hey, I guess I'm feeling pretty happy, right? So it's not, I mean, so you might think that on average, if you take a lot, if you take a lot of these surveys, these random effects might sort of cancel out, right? Where the law of large numbers may be in effect, right? And maybe for some of these random events that happen to have occurred, maybe they kind of would cancel out, right? But in what situation would the law of large numbers not help us cancel out the noise that we don't want?
When we were talking about the differences in cultures and how some cultures rate themselves more happy and some cultures rate themselves less happy.
Right, exactly. I mean, to say generally, the random noise doesn't cancel out in a large sample when the noise is not random. The canceling out only works for random noise, right? If the noise isn't random and it actually is correlated with certain characteristics of the population, no matter how large your numbers are, right, it's not going to cancel out because the characteristics of the population remain as they are, right? At any rate, just it is important to step back and not take this kind of survey research as sort of the truth, because there is a lot of there are a lot of problems with the measures, right? Maybe there's problems in the data collection, and definitely as the question itself has been shown to not produce very reliable results at all, right? So we could try to draw some general type conclusions from that, right? Now, what other measures of happiness were discussed in this? Yeah. All right, that's a fairly new method because actually doing physical measurements requires equipment as opposed to just a survey, right? And we'll get to that in just a little bit. Any other measures? Yeah.
Having a random noise go off at a certain time during the day, or a few times during the day, and have the person write down how happy they are at that moment and what they're doing.
Right, so that is called the experience sampling method, right? And so they say, people are really bad at just doing a subjective judgment of how happy they are, generally speaking. Why don't we just sample them at random during the day and say, how happy are you feeling now? How about now? How about now? How about now? Right? And we're not asking them any difficult questions. We're asking them a simple question. How about now? And then we just ask them a lot of times for a certain period of time. And then if on average they're saying, I'm feeling pretty good, you can say, I guess those guys are feeling pretty good, right? The problem with that method is that it's kind of pretty expensive. So there's a variation of that called the day reconstruction method, right? So instead of just prompting them throughout the day with some kind of a device, they're just asked to sit down for 5 minutes at the end of the day and kind of think about what happened during the day and how happy they are with that particular event or that particular day, right? And so that's kind of a much cheaper proxy for this experience sampling method. And then of course we get down into like actual physiological measures, like measuring your like hormones and stress responses and all that, just like you mentioned. So one thing that we find is that number one, let's just focus on this actual physiological measures because they're the thing that you cannot really fake very easily. And what has been found is that people do not really realize how the situation they're in affects them, right? There is this important concept of habituation, right? You get used to whatever you are, whatever your situation is, right? The purpose of our nervous system is to alert us to something new happening, right? If something is happening and it keeps happening and it keeps happening, it's no longer interesting. and there is no purpose to the nervous system just telling us, hey, it's still happening. Hey, it's still happening, right? You got to save your attention for the novel phenomena, novel stimuli, so you know how to respond. Presumably, if something just keeps happening, you don't need to come up with a new response to it, right? And so that suggests that when people evaluate, their happiness, maybe they're not even aware of how good or how bad they might actually be feeling, right? Because their brain ignores all this, the sort of background baseline level of stuff, and just focuses on the unusual stuff that is happening, right? Do you guys remember the Easterlin paradox? I think it was mentioned in the paper.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the nature of the paradox?
I would say it's about like linguistics or something.
No, not quite.
It's like
Anyone remember the Easterlin paradox? No?
Okay, I could be confusing with the other two that were mentioned at, like around the same time. Is that the one where you have two people who maybe make the same amount of money and rate themselves as equally happy, but they have different standards of happiness? So
No, that's not really. I mean, that's that was kind of an indictment of the validity of the measure of how happy you are. Because they say different people have completely different levels of happiness, but they could be choosing the same happiness level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the Easterlin paradox is something.
Isn't it like even though like, the average income has increased with a lot, average happiness hasn't increased?
Exactly. That was it, right? The Easterlin paradox is this psychologist. His last name was Easterlin. Big surprise, right? He looked at the happiness data and he said, the level of income from 1946 to 1970, that was his data sample, has gone up in the United States very significantly, right? If you look at the GDP per capita or average household income, the numbers shot up from 1946 to 1970, and yet the average self-reported happiness has stayed flat. Yeah.
Couldn't that be due to inflation, where like more money buys the same thing?
I mean, he had controlled for inflation. It's a good point, right? And we'll talk more about inflation in this course for sure. But in general, unless somebody is really, really inept, you can assume that when levels of income are compared across time, they're using some kind of an inflation-adjusted level. Because if they don't, it doesn't do anything for you, right? That's a good question, though, right? On an inflation-adjusted basis, even adjusted, if you look at the economic history of the United States, the incomes have really gone up significantly in that time period, and yet the average level of happiness hasn't. And so Easterlin was saying, WTF, guys, right? So that's the Easterlin paradox, right? He was basically saying it looks like your level of economic success has absolutely no relationship to how happy you are, right? And so this was really one of the first landmark studies that prompted more research into what are the covariates of happiness and what are the problems with the measures, how do we measure it better, etc., right? And several subsequent studies have reanalyzed the data, they look at new data, and they actually found that the levels of happiness do correlate with income. One of them was that it correlates logarithmically rather than linearly, right? Of course, the Easterlin guy is very attached to having a paradox named after him. So whenever somebody says, "Hey, we tried this other analysis and the paradox disappears," and he immediately writes a paper that tries to disprove what the other guys are saying, and they're saying, "Oh, actually, they did it wrong. The paradox still exists." I mean, if I had a Falkenstein paradox named after me, Like I would be defending it at all costs. I mean, you don't want your paradox to go away, right? Right. Now, let me see here. So, yeah.
The paradox that says that economic status doesn't correlate with happiness, or it hasn't changed even though the amount of income has raised.
Well, the paradox was that incomes have gone up, but happiness has not, right? Even I mean, the paradox, the definition of a paradox is that something happens that kind of is counterintuitive, right? Not necessarily like an mathematical impossibility, like some subset of the world of paradoxes out there, right, has to do with actual mathematical impossibility. They're like fun logical problems. But in general, in general conversation, the paradox is like something that we do not expect. Yeah.
It's sort of related to the recent example. If you compare yourself to what you want to do really back when you really got medicine and really got
Right.
down at an early age, then you can see yourself a lot happier because you think about it more recently, like, oh well, everybody has a car, we have a license, and we can go out to eat. And it does, you don't even feel like, oh, I'm really well off or anything, so I don't think
I mean, yes, and that's exactly one of the explanations for this paradox, right? Has to do with the way people evaluate their level of happiness, right? So it's have you guys heard this concept of hedonic treadmill? No?
I think so.
Okay. Do you know what it is? Or do you just remember
No, but
hearing
when
it?
you say it, it's
All right. Okay. So do you know the meaning of the word hedonic? Okay. Yeah.
It sounds like good for happiness. It's like hedonism.
Right. So hedonic is a Greek word meaning happiness. Right. Hedonic is an adjective. Right. So hedonic treadmill means like a happiness treadmill. Right. So what happens when you run on a treadmill with your relative positioning to everything else around you? Nothing, right? You stand on the treadmill and you can run very hard, right? But you're not catching up to anybody, right? So that's kind of the analogy. Hedonic treadmill is that you try to, you do a lot of things. You try to make yourself happy. You try to make money, and when you think about your level of happiness, it hasn't changed even after all that stuff you did, right? That's kind of the nature of hedonic. Like we're all hanging out there and trying to make ourselves happy, but we're not getting anywhere, right? And one of the reasons is that people's evaluation of their happiness is relative to what they currently see around them, right? It's one of the names for it is the keeping up with the Joneses effect, right? If you have a car, but everybody else also has a car, it's not so unusual to say, "Hey, I have a car! Awesome! I'm so happy!" Right? Like back when Ford first issued the Model T, and like nobody had a car, you say, "Hey, car! Awesome! I don't have to feed my horses anymore!" Right? And it's like all that good stuff, right? But like now, car is just it is what it is, right? Or whatever. Like back when cell phones were first starting to come out, like in the early '90s, they started to become available. But they were like really, really expensive. So mostly it was just like, corporations used to like buy a cell phone for some of their managers because they were on the move and they had to communicate. So like people on the street like usually didn't have them, right? And so like when you first got that first cell phone, you're like, awesome! I can make calls while I'm walking down the freaking street. Right? How cool is that, right? I can be like playing baseball in the middle of a field and like get a call from my buddies, right? Or something. It was awesome. Like now, everybody has a cell phone, and you don't even think twice about how awesome it is that like you can be riding the train and like talking with your parents or something, right? Although maybe you don't like talking with them, so I don't know. Right? And so, right, so this is kind of the like the hedonic treadmill effect. You don't compare where you are relative to where you were before. You compare to what you see around you, right? This is like the recency effect comes into play again. So that's kind of like that one, one of the explanations for the Easterling paradox is that, people have become happier, they just don't realize it, right? Stuff kind of really sucked in a lot of ways earlier, right? I think the paper that we read suggested that, medical care sucked and people walked around with toothaches and bad joints and who knows what. But your conscious mind kind of tunes out all those pains and all that crap if it kind of keeps happening all the time, right? Your attention is not built for paying attention to stuff that doesn't change, right? And so people were really not very happy, but if you asked them about it, they wouldn't think, oh, like, my tooth hurts, because it's been hurting for the past 5 years, and just the way it is, right? So the point, so the point of all this is that, in general, I think the goal of our, financial planning and sort of economic activity is to try to make ourselves happy, right? But the problem with that is that if you just get on the treadmill and start running, and don't think about what your don't keep track of where you used to be and like what your improvements have been, right? Then you're sort of doing yourself a disservice, right? Because for all that work, you do not realize the gain of the actual experience of feeling happy and fulfilled, because you're not thinking of how much better you have become, right? So this is kind of more of a philosophical, self-helpy type of thing. But really, when there are like certain sayings like stop once a day and think what all the things you're grateful for are and all that, right? And it has been shown that it actually does make people happier to kind of realize how good they have it, right? Because if you don't think about it, you don't realize, and it's kind of wasted on you because you got it in order to feel happy. And then you don't spend the time to actually try to be happy about it, right? And it's kind of silly, right? You're not acting to further your goal of being happy, right? So as this graph shows, like it is important not to be destitute, right? When you're really poor and like shit sucks, it's hard to be happy, right? Because you're living paycheck to paycheck, or you're struggling to feed yourself. You can't afford to go to the dentist, and whatever. And it really sucks, right? You don't want to be there, right? So it's at this point you really have to focus on actually getting ahead economically, right? It's very it will actually improve your happiness a lot. Right? But once you get it, above a certain level, you get a lot better bang per buck, sort of, per buck worth of effort. If you try to think, try to assess where you are relative to where you have been, how good you have it, and what, of course, you can think also what are the problems that you still want to solve, but you don't want to forget about all the problems you have already solved. Right? Because some of the return you get from solving the problem is feeling happy about solving the problem. So don't forget to feel happy about solving your problems, right? Not just right after you solve them, but sometime, over time, over a longer period of time as well. Now, a lot of other research has been done for sort of this happiness, and there are other covariates that are found. Number one is that involuntary unemployment tends to make people really unhappy. Well, of course, it's not surprising because that's always on their mind when they just lost their job and you say, how happy are you? They say, well, I just lost my job. Not very happy, right? In general, like having plenty of leisure time tends to be correlated with happiness. Having freedom and control over what you do in your life tends to be correlated with happiness. Right? So there are a lot of these good things that are sort of correlated with happiness. Even though our measure is kind of lame and has a lot of problems, it's hard to think that all these things do not actually make you happier and better off in some way, right? The point of all this is then to go and say, a lot of this sort of consumer decisions to get stuff, you think it will kind of make you happy to get some more stuff, right? But number one, if you probably won't be thinking about your stuff a few months after you got them, right? It's not going to be making you happier. So you're going to be spending your money on stuff, and a few months later you'll say, somehow I'm not really feeling very happy. I got to get some more stuff, right? And you're on this hedonic treadmill getting stuff, right? But the problem with getting stuff is that everything has costs and benefits. Life is kind of an optimization problem, right? So if you keep spending your money on stuff that you end up not really benefiting from, you end up having a lot less money. And then, when you have less money, then you're going to be feeling less happy, right? If you want to have freedom and control over what you do in your life, you want to have plenty of spare financial resources so that if something happens, you can say, no sweat, I can handle it, right? Another area of research has shown that people tend to have a much larger effect on their happiness when bad things happen to them than when good things happen to them. So you want to focus on trying to avoid the bad things more than you want to focus on trying to get more good things. Because the bad things, if they happen, are going to have a lot larger impact on you than when something like randomly good happens to you. So you want to have this financial cushioning in order to handle the bad things, because those are the things that will really give you a punch in the happiness, right? So some of the things you want to think about, just as some personal advice, when you're thinking, do I really want to spend my money on this or that, is a couple of biases in effective forecasting. Right? What does effective forecasting mean? What does forecasting mean? Predicting what's going to happen, right? What does effective mean? As far as psychology is concerned, affect is kind of your feelings, right? So effective forecasting means predicting your feelings as a result of something happening. So there are some persistent biases in effective forecasting. One is called the durability bias. By now, we're not surprised at all, right? You tend to think that if something happens, you'll be very happy for a long time. In reality, you'll only be happy for a short time, right? Because of all the things we discussed, the recency bias, right? And the comparison metrics that you use for measuring your happiness. Right? So when something happens, something good happens, you're thinking, I'll be really happy for like years if this happens. Right? But really it happens and you're like kind of happy for a little bit, and then you're looking for the next thing. So be aware that you're likely to be overestimating the benefits that something is going to give you. Right? And the other bias is called the impact bias. Right? So we have a bias of overestimating the duration of the effect. We also have a bias of estimating the size of the effect, the magnitude. Right? So the impact, people tend to think that something is going to make them more happy and more unhappy, if it's a bad thing, than it actually does. Right? So in reality, there is this concept called hedonic set point, that most of us, due to whatever personal idiosyncrasies that we have, tend to gravitate to a particular level of happiness, right? So let's say we have, some kind of a thermometer of happiness, right? And different people have a different sort of default set point of happiness. Some people tend to be kind of very sad and cynical and pessimistic, and maybe their default level of happiness, if nothing is happening, they're just kind of sitting there, maybe they'll be like somewhere over here, right? Some people tend to be generally happier, right? And maybe their default level is going to be here. And the point is that over time, as things happen in life, your thermometer of happiness gets perturbed up or down. But after the perturbation dies out, you return back to your original set point of happiness, right? And there have been studies, actually one very interesting study that was looking at sets of identical twins. And by looking at the data, they found that this hedonic set point has approximately a 50% genetic component. Right? So 50% of where your hedonic set point is determined just by your genetic code. Nothing you can really do about that. But it also means that the other 50% is determined by your environment and circumstances. Now, research, longitudinal research that looks at people over a long period of time has found that most people's hedonic set point doesn't really change. So it's like whatever it is, it tends to stay where it is. So if you're generally happy, you'll probably remain generally happy. If you're generally unhappy, you'll probably remain generally unhappy, right? Or anywhere kind of on this continuum. But a sizable minority of people do change their hedonic set point. Right? So it is possible to work on your own mental state and think about how you want to improve your happiness. And by our discussion of all the different cognitive biases, the hedonic treadmill, the recency effect, the comparison points, you can train yourself to compare with more relevant metrics. And if it so happens that your quality of life actually is improving, if you compare it with stuff you had a few years ago rather than with stuff that happened yesterday, maybe you can affect your hedonic set point, right? And actually become more, get better life satisfaction, right? So, and this is all kind of a little bit of a side track relative to financial planning, right? But still, since we plan in order to kind of achieve better well-being, I think it is important for us to know this information about what makes people happy, right? Because you see a lot of people that are like making money hand over fist and are, blowing it on all sorts of crap, and then in the end they realize, wait a second, I have no money left. What happened? Right? And probably some often used examples from professional athletes, right? They make really a crap load of money, but generally for a very short period of time, right? You're only an athlete at the peak of your performance for maybe 5, maybe 10 years, depending on the sport you're in, etc., right? And you're making money hand over fist, right? Crap load, like millions and millions of dollars a year, right? But if you don't, and those athletes, they know that after 5 years, they'll basically have to retire because they're no longer able to compete with the younger guys for whatever reason, right? And so if they were rational decision makers, they would say, okay, I'm going to take all this crap load of money I'm making, I'm going to save it, and so when I'm done, I'll be set for life, right? Instead, you get all sorts of, you see all sorts of news stories about, former professional athletes being like destitute because they blew all their money on crap, right? So here's the thing, most of us are not going to be professional athletes, right? Just the fact that we're sitting here in honors personal finance maybe suggests that you're going to college rather than playing some sport. So your career is probably going to be longer, but still, you're not always going to have the same earnings potential, right? Eventually, you're going to say, I hope I have amassed enough financial resources that I can hang loose, right? And in general, the better off you are at controlling your spending, the easier it is for you to amass the wealth that you need, and the more financial freedom you will have throughout your life. right? Choice and control of your life is one of the important covariates of happiness. And one way to achieve that choice is to have plenty of money to fall back on. Right? If you have a job and your boss starts giving you a bunch of crap, right? If you have no money and you say, I really need this job, because if I lose this job, I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and like I'm going to be screwed, right? You'll have to put up with a lot more bullshit from the guy, right? Whereas if you have plenty of wealth stored away, that if you lose the job, it's like screw it. If I find the job in sometime in the next 2 years, I'll be fine. Then if your job situation becomes bad, you say screw you, I'm out of here, right? Or really anything. Like if you have the financial means to not worry about the minor things, you will really have much better chance of avoiding the bad stuff that might happen to you, right? Okay, any questions? This sort of making sense? All right, good stuff. Okay, now let's see. What else do I want to talk to you about? Let me check the time. Now I'm warmed up. Okay, so I think at this point we should talk a little bit about expected utility theory. Now, how many of you know the basics of statistics and probability? Okay, so for the most part, you guys are all right, but let's. In that case, let me just give you a pop quiz. Not going to be graded, but it's a pop quiz nevertheless. All right. So let's start with a simple problem. Let's say you throw a coin 3 times. It's a fair coin. It's got heads and tails, right? You know the coin drill. You throw a coin 3 times. What is the probability that your 3 throws will produce only 1 head? Take a few minutes. See if you can figure it out. You can discuss it with your neighbor if you like. If you have no idea what to do, then you don't know the basics of probability of statistics. Okay. Raise your hand if you are done with the problem. Okay. Raise your hand if you have not yet done with the problem. you didn't raise your hand on either one of those questions. What's up with that? Now here's a little rule of probability for you. You know, an event and its complement have to add up to 100% probability. So either you are done or you're not done. There's nothing in the middle. All right, so what's your take on that? Anybody who wants to volunteer? All right.
0.375 or 3/8.
Okay, why is that?
Because there's two possibilities in each, there's two outcomes on each event. So from that, if you make a trade, from the first outcomes, you would have two more, and then two more ultimately from those two outcomes.
So what's the total number of outcomes?
Eight
8 outcomes. Okay.
And 3 of them feature one head.
Okay. Everybody get that? Maybe? No? Right? So there are 8 possible outcomes, right? Remember that on each throw, we have 2 possibilities, right? It's either a head or a tail. So on the next throw, whatever happens in the first one, it's again either a head or a tail. On the third throw, whatever happened in the first throw, it's again either a head or a tail. So the total number of possibilities is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. All right? Now let's enumerate these possibilities, right? So what can happen? We can get 3 heads. Lucky. All right? So what else can happen is we can only get 2 heads. All right? If we get 2 heads, what are the possibilities of how this can happen? Well, we can get the 2 heads first and then a tail. We can get a head, a tail, and a head. And we can get tail, head, head. All right? So these are the 3 ways that we can achieve 1 tail. Right? Everybody with me so far? Okay, and let's see. Next we can get 2 tails. Right? So it can be tail, tail, head, tail, head, tail, and head, tail, tail. All right? So 3 more outcomes where we can get 2 tails, also known as 1 head. All right? And finally, we can get no heads at all. You can convince yourself that these are the only possible outcomes that we can get from throwing the coin 3 times. Right? So now if you are asked what is the probability of getting only 1 head out of the 3 throws, you might say, okay, well, out of the 8 possible outcomes, there is 3 of them that produce only 1 head. And importantly, you should also realize that the probability of each outcome the probability of all outcomes is uniform. They're all equally probable, right? So what is the probability of getting this outcome? 1/8, right? So why is that? I mean, these are, just to go back, events are independent if when the probability of both of them occurring is the product of the 2 individual probabilities, right? So in this case, the probability is going to be 1/2 probability of head times another 1/2 probability of the second head times another 1/2 probability of the third head. So altogether, 1/8. No big surprise. All right? And so that, by the same token, we can derive that the probability of each of these is also exactly 1/8, right? Everybody with me? Okay, and so as a result, if we want the probability of only 1 head, we have 3 outcomes. The total probability of these is then 3/8, because they're mutually exclusive. All right, so okay, everybody with me on that? Okay, good stuff. All right, so let's see. Where do we go from here? So an important concept in probability and statistics is the concept of the expected value, also known as the mean, also known as the average, right? Now, why is it important? Right? If something on an intuitive level, if something in some event is repeated many, many times with some kind of outcome, right? Then the expected value is what do we expect on average to get out of it after all is said and done, right? For example, let's all right, so let's imagine that we're going to play a game. I'm going to throw a coin. If it falls on heads, I'm going to give you $100. Sounds cool, right? If it falls on tails, you're going to give me $100. Sounds not so cool, right? Now, if I ask you what is the expected value of this proposition to you, what do you guys think? All right, why is that? Right, so approximately half the time you're going to lose $100, and the other half the time you're going to win $100. Right, and so on average, you're just going, you're going to get $0, right? So, okay. Now, generally, we define expected value as the probability weighted average of all of the possible outcomes. Right, so in the case of our game, when we throw the coin and we have $100 for heads and minus 100 for tails, right? So the probability of heads is how much? 50%, also known as 1/2. And the outcome if you get heads is $100. And then we have, what's the probability of tails? Another half, right? And the outcome that we get is minus 100. And so what do we have? 0. Okay. Now, the probabilities, of course, don't have to be equal. Right? Let's imagine that we're rolling a fair die. How many sides are there on a regular die? 6. All right. Good. And if you have any D&D players, I know you might say like 15, but okay. So let's imagine that we're going to throw a fair die. What's the probability of getting a 1 if you roll a die? 1/6, right? Because there are 6 possible faces, right? And we say it's a fair die, which means that the probability distribution is uniform, right? So they're all equally probable. So let's say we're playing a game where I say that if you get a 1 or a 2, then I will give you $100. But if you get a 3, 4, 5, or a 6, then you give me $100. Now, do you want to play the game? First question. Yeah, probably not. Okay, but still, it's a question that we might answer is what is the expected value of this game, right? So can we find the expected value of this game? Okay, how do we do that?
Probability of me winning $100, and then with my 100, and then add it to the probability of you winning $100.
Okay, so what's your probability of winning? Right, 2 out of 6, which is a third, right? So we have 1/3 times 100 for you, right? And the other 2/3, also known as 4/6, right? The other 4 outcomes are going to be 2/3 times minus 100, right? And so what does that come out to? Plus or minus $1, doesn't matter. Just about, right? 1/3 of 100 is 33.3333, right? 2/3 of minus 100 is minus 66.6666, right? So 33 minus 66 is minus 33.53. Right? Okay. So here's the thing, right? Why is it minus $33, right? We'll say, minus 33 and 1/3, to be precise, right? So if we play this game, is minus 33 and 1/3 a possible outcome for you? No, it isn't. You can either win 100 or lose 100. Right? So if you play a game, you can never lose 33 and 1/3 dollars from one round of the game. Right? So the meaning of the expected value is what will happen per outcome on average if we play this many, many times. Right? This is kind of the frequentist interpretation of the expected value. And we play this many, many times and see what happens on average. Right? Make sense? So in general, if you are taken to gambling, I hope you're not, but in general, you know that when you go to a casino and you play some games, what do you think is the expected value of those games to you? Right, it must be a negative value. Why must it be a negative expected value? Right, because somebody has got to pay for the fancy ass building and for all the stuff, right? And that somebody is you, right? Right? So the casino, all the games are specifically designed to have a negative expected value. Now there are some exceptions, like blackjack. If you are able to keep track of what cards have already been played, you can push your probability of winning into the positive territory, right? But of course, once you demonstrate your ability to consistently win, the casino will ban you from playing there. The place doesn't exist to make you happy. It exists to make the casino owners happy. But in general, right, the casino knows that even if the expected value is only slightly small, as long as it is, only slightly negative, as long as it is negative, over many, many, many rounds of all the games that people play, they're going to make money, right? So sometimes they're going to lose. And on occasion, some guy's going to walk out with some money. And you say, yay, I won, right? But his win is going to be offset by the other 50 guys who lost, right? So the concept of the expected value of a proposition is a very important one. You don't really want to play a negative expected value game if you can avoid it. Right? Because sometimes you might win, but it's, in expectation, you're going to lose money. Right? On the other hand, if the expected value is positive, hypothetically you should want to play. Right? Because if you keep playing these positive expected value games, unless you're just totally, really, really unlucky, so as to lose all of them by random chance, the positive expected value suggests that you should be better off if you take on positive expected value propositions, right? Now, here's the thing. Let's say, let me give you the following proposition. We're going to throw a coin, and if it lands on heads, I give you $200. But if it lands on tails, you give me $100. Okay? Okay. So raise your hand if you want to play this game with me right now. Raise your hand if you do not want to play this game. Raise your hand if you didn't raise your hand on either one of these questions. Why?
Because you asked right now in the last question.
Sneaky. Anyway. Alright, so some of you want to play this game, right? Now, what if I say that we're only going to play it once? I'm not going to throw the coin 1,000 times with you. We're only going to play this coin throw game once. And you have a chance to win 100, to win 200 or lose 100. Do you still want to play?
Yeah. Consider myself
Okay, raise your hand if you want to play a one-round game of the coin toss with me right now. I mean, this is hypothetical. I'm not supposed to involve real money with my students, but pretend like this is real money, right? Not, you don't have to be afraid that I'll force you to play this game. If you say yes, I won't. But pretend this is real money. Would you actually, play a one-round game? Okay, raise your hand. I have 3 of you willing to play this one-round game. Okay. Now imagine, if I say that we're going to make a coin toss 100 times and play the same game over and over again, 100 times. Do you want to play this game? Raise your hand if you want to play this game with me right now. Okay. So I see a lot more of you are more willing to play this game if we're going to repeat this many, many times, right? Now let me ask you this question. Somebody who wants to play it 100 times but doesn't want to play one time. Anybody? I know a lot more people raise their hand to play for 100 than to one. You, for example, right? You said you will play for 100 times, but not for one time.
There's a lot more risk associated with the first one as opposed to the second.
All right, now let me ask you a question. Are you going to die tomorrow? Are you planning on it?
I'm not planning on it.
All right, you're not planning on it. That's good. You're not planning on it. All right. So do you think this is the last time you're going to come across a positive expected value proposition?
Hopefully
All right. Hopefully there'll be a lot more positive expected value proposition. All right. So if each time one positive expected value game comes to you, and you think about, well, it's too risky, I don't want to do it, and each time this happens, what will happen? Then in your entire lifetime, you will never take positive expected value propositions, right? Whereas if I ask you right now, imagine in your lifetime, you're going to have 1,000 positive expected value propositions. Do you want to take them all? You will say, yes, of course, right? Well, they're positive expected value, right? You guys see what I'm driving at? Even though right now it's only one time. And we're going to discuss risk aversion in just a little bit, you must think in the broader framework. This is not the last time you come across somebody offering you positive expected value proposition, right? If you think about it as this is my one chance, do I want to take it? A lot of you will say, well, it's too risky, I don't want it. But if you realize that through your entire lifetime you'll have hundreds and hundreds of times, then you'll say, of course, I should do that because on average I will win. Right, so this is actually a case of another cognitive bias, right? There is the sort of the narrow framing and the wide framing, also known as the inside view and the outside view. Right, if you look at your whole life from the bird's eye view, you'll say, I want him to take every single positive expected value proposition as long as the stakes are not so large that you can lose your shirt if you're unlucky, right? That's what you'll want yourself to do if you're looking at your life from the bird's eye. But when you are sitting here and doing this, and you see each one come your way, you're saying, well, it's only one time. I could lose. I better not. It's only one time. I could lose. I better not. Right? And you end up not doing it. Right? You had a...
Yeah. The game we're talking about right now is the coin toss.
Yes.
I think I would do the exact opposite and take the one flip it with only the potential to lose $100 versus the potential to lose $10,000.
All right,
Even
so
though
yeah.
I likely won't lose that much, but that is a possibility.
So we're going to get to that, right? We're going to discuss the binomial distribution. Are we going to do it today? What time is it? No, we're not going to do it today. Right? One of the let me just mention some things for next time. Number one, please remember to form your groups for your research projects. Right? I would like you to submit some to me by Tuesday of next week, maybe Thursday, but not really later. Right? Number two, we are Next time we're going to discuss expected utility theory. We're going to discuss the binomial distribution in the context of our coin toss game again, right? And we're going to come up with some sort of general purpose rules for that are going to help us make small decisions as we go through life. And then we're going to discuss some material out of the Gitman book. So you guys read chapter 1 of Gitman? Was it exciting? Maybe not so exciting, right? So I will send you more details, but I want you to read that chapter and form, create your own personal income statement and see what are your inflows and what are your outflows, and we're going to discuss that component of personal financial planning, which is figuring out